that we need most are typically things we have never seen before, right? And we have to be like willing and brave enough to like dream it up, no different than an artist would.
Welcome. I'm your host, Roheen Bajram. I'm on a mission to redefine the faces of leadership through speaking, consulting, and writing. Unspeakable Leadership is a space to reclaim our stories and empower each other to see the value in how we, as women of color, lead. I hope you'll join me on this journey of unpacking experiences, lessons learned, sharing laughs, and likely a tear or two. Let us grow together in conversation. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to share with you a little about this next guest. Now, this person holds a special place in my heart. But before I tell you why that's the case, let me tell you a little bit about her. Altagracia Montilla is an award-winning facilitator, culture consultant, conflict coach, and healer. She founded A.M. Consulting, a firm that supports a diverse range of mission-driven institutions, from startups to multinational corporations, to align actions with values by the power of data and human connection, something that we need more than ever in the world now. Altagracia also founded Freedom Readers, a virtual book club focused on social justice, intentional community building, and meaningful conversations. She facilitates popular transformative experiences and healing retreats, and Altagracia is one of one at creating spaces where safety, creativity, collaboration, and belonging are standards. Welcome, Altagracia, to Unspeakable Leadership. I'm so thrilled to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I led in the beginning to say you're somebody who's so special to me, and I wanted to follow up on why that's the case. We met really strangers in a virtual community gathering through a different person who I know that you're deeply connected with and who I've recently connected with. And I showed up in that virtual gathering on sort of on this breaking point of burnout. And although every fiber in my being had said, stay at home, Roheen, rest, there was this one sort of calling in my body that I needed to be at this gathering. And so I remember showing up and probably 5 minutes into the conversation, being there in sisterhood with such incredible people and just bawling my eyes out. Because I was hearing what people were sharing, things were resonating, and I couldn't stop. Like my body was full on releasing. And I just remember you taking a moment in that gathering to acknowledge what was happening for me. And even later on, you sent me such a beautiful message of kindness and checking in. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. Thank you for exercising that compassion, because that was a low point for me, and one that I never ever would have expected I would have displayed in a group of strangers, but people who now I can truly call as sisters and incredible people that I'm glad to be in my life. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being that person.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And listen, I want to applaud you for listening to your intuition, right? To come to this space, even when you kind of doubted it, you didn't know if you should, you thought maybe you should rest, but you came forth and you shared your truth. And listen, my thing is, when someone shares their truth, we have to, I feel like it's a gift, right? Like you gave the gift of your truth, your honesty, and transparency. And I feel like we have to cherish that gift as something sacred. So thank you for receiving the gift back of kindness too.
Thank you. I feel like you always bring this beautiful way of seeing people, and there's just so much reciprocity in how you connect. And so, I'd love for those who are listening and those who are watching to learn a little bit about, who is Altagracia? What has been your leadership journey to get you to who you are today?
Ooh, yeah. Thank you so much. And listen, I appreciate any question. that allows room for reflection, right? Because sometimes these questions are
Yeah.
things that we don't necessarily think about. So I'm like going back into the history, like, what are these milestones for me? So, I will say, my journey with leadership, oftentimes we think about leadership as starting with like workplaces, right? That term
Yeah.
is typically associated with work, the traditional workplace.
Yeah.
So when I think about my early days, years in leadership, it started much, before that. It's much earlier. I'm thinking about like leadership in community, leadership in family.
Mm.
I was a middle child, first girl. I played a very important role in my family, and I think the shaping of what it means to be a leader really started there. I can't say that someone told me, explicitly, here's what it means to be a leader, here's what it's like, because we didn't necessarily have the space, time, resources to be able to kind of have those conversations. But I will say I do recognize and want to honor my upbringing, right? Like the journey that I was on before kind of entering institutions where I had the opportunity to play more traditional leadership roles. I will say when I did enter these kind of institutions, schools, when I was, in the workplace, I was always called like a natural leader. Folks would say that, but no one said what
Mhm.
about me made me a natural leader. So I was like, okay, you go into these roles, and try to do your best in them. And I didn't necessarily get the information, that I needed to really like own into this craft of what it meant to be a
Mhm.
leader. So I had to really explore myself. And it left a lot of room, I think, for me to really think about what does that word mean to me? Who do I want to be when it comes to being a leader? How can I be a leader but also have it align with who I want to be in this world, period. Like how I want to move about in this world and engage with other people. Um, so I think there was definitely a moment of like, if I had to describe it in 3 words, it'd be like dream it up, right? So I had to dream of the kind of leader I wanted to see. And I had to just decide I'm going to become that, right? And I'm so serious. And then, here's another interesting point too. Another milestone that came to my mind, or like a point in history, my leadership journey, when I started my business, when I made a decision to
Mhm.
leave kind of the institutional space and just start my own business, my own space, my own community, my own institution. I was the earlier parts realizing that I myself am my own leader and then my own employee at the same time. And I had to really think
Mhm.
about, okay, well, what kind of leader am I going to be to myself? Right?
Oh,
Yeah. Which I
and that's
Oh my
huge.
good, is it? And here's the funny thing too was I had to really sit with how much unlearning I had to do, because I lived
Yeah.
many years in leadership roles, and I feel like most of my career actually was in leadership roles from start, which is really interesting. And I think along the ways, because I had this reputation and this narrative of being a strong South Bronx woman who like is
Mm.
gonna say the thing but do it with love. I didn't necessarily expect how much I had to unlearn, because I realized I was working
Mm.
myself really hard at the start of that journey of me starting my business. And I was like, man, where did I learn this? And I realized that it was in these workplaces that I've been for a long time, where they were just turning people out. It's like work really hard.
Mhm.
These expectations for human beings that weren't necessarily humane. So I had to really think about how can I be
Wow.
a leader to myself in a way that inspired me and moved me. So that was, I think, the most recent huge shift in my leadership journey.
Oh my gosh. There's so much that you've shared like that. I'm like, oh my goodness. I want to honor
Mm,
it because you've shared such a beautiful, deep way of looking at how, when we distill titles or we distill workplaces or environments, at the heart of what you've just shared, Altagracia, is this
mm,
beingness. This establishment of who do I want to be
yes.
as a leader, and I think about how often when you're, for anyone who's starting early on in their career, as you've shared as with your leadership journey, you're, we look to others. We look to what's being emulated, what's being
Right.
modeled, what's what's expected, what's normal, and then when, often when you see people who are stepping out of those confines of the box or what's considered normal, and those are the people who are either let go or ostracized, that can very quickly be the feedback to, well, don't act that way,
Hmm.
right? Like, and sometimes that often means for a lot of women of color, don't be yourself, right? Just fit a particular narrative that's going to get you the promotions, that's going to get you the work, the salary, and so forth. And so I love that you've also shared that it was when you open up your business that that was the invitation and the opening to now almost redesign a whole way of looking at
Right.
leadership that would be grounded in your value of integrity and your value of
Right.
authenticity. And I'm excited for what's coming
Yeah.
as we have this conversation, because you're providing for us, I think, such an openness to see that there can be a different way of
Right.
leading and that it can work and it can be successful.
Absolutely. And I want to just uplift something you said too, because you said
Yes.
oftentimes we'll turn to things that we have seen before. And I always say the
Yeah.
things that we need most are typically things we have never seen before. Right. And we have to be like
Yes. Oh,
willing and
yeah.
brave enough to like dream it up, no different than an artist would, right? Like you have a vision for what something could and should be, and you have to embody it, become it, and create it by way of being the thing that you have thought of. So I think that is really where a lot of it has come from, just that leadership piece of how I decide to lead now. And listen, it's ever changing too. Like the more I learn,
Yeah.
the more I shift and change, the more I lead persons and they impact me, because I believe leadership is a two-way street, right? Like there are persons who
Totally.
trust me to lead them, and I trust them to also inspire me. So yeah, things will shift and change, and I'm open to that as well.
I love that. I love that. And let's jump into something that you and I have really had conversations
Mhm.
with, and I think there have been moments where we've had to be like, oh, we have to stop, we have to, because our schedules are busy,
Right.
or we can't go any further. But it's a conversation that I know is dear to your heart and to mine, and that is, we see these ways of leading that are often based in layers of
Yeah.
oppression, layers of power and
Mhm.
dominance. And I would love to hear from you. What have you seen and how has that impacted your leadership in general?
Absolutely. So, and again, I'm speaking from the perspective of being in the workplace and now supporting workplaces and being the thing they want to be. So, essentially, like dreaming up the kind of organization they want to be and then fulfilling that. So, really rethinking, reimagining what leadership can look like. And some of the things that I've seen are, and these are heavy words, right? So, but
Oh, absolutely.
I'm just like giving that warning, but exploitation, right? The exploitation of persons,
Mm,
overworking persons. There seems to be this disconnect between, recognizing that a person is someone outside of the workplace. They don't just exist within the workplace, but they are a person with a whole history and a history to be written
mhm,
ahead of them, right? There is the kind of the absence of receiving feedback as a leader, that also being kind of another toxic or
mhm,
oppressive way of existing. And really, it's practicing power over people as opposed to power with people, right? That is like the major, I think, the distinction that I've seen. And the way it's really impacted me is I look at it and I say, oh, I don't want that. I don't want to be that. That's not what I want to be. I have always thought about how when you again are leading and functioning as a leader, and not just in workplaces but in this
mhm.
world, right? Because it's not just the workplace. You essentially are people are trusting you to lead. There are persons who
Yes.
have their trust in you, their belief in you, and I feel like that is something that's very sacred, trust, right? And I feel like I treat that trust as something that is very sacred, and I think about what kind of chapter I'm going to play in someone's narrative, right? It could
Yeah.
be someone who is older, someone who's younger, someone who's even in similar age. But I'm always very conscious of like, you know, workplaces can scar people, right? Leaders can really scar
Hmm.
people if they're not, they lead in a way that can be hurtful and harmful. So I think about what kind of chapter I want to help write in this person's narrative, which also comes with a deep interest in who the person is, which is something again that I think a lot of leaders oftentimes forget to do, right? And that kind of is aligned with what I said about forgetting people are persons outside of the workplace, right? There should be this deep intentional exploration of who someone is before they got into this place, this kind of this intersection of stories, yourself and others who you are
Hmm.
leading, and an exploration of where that will go from there on out. Hmm.
Yeah. You're so like you're so right. Like when I think of policies and I think of even some of the leadership programs that early on in my career that I would go to, there was a lot of emphasis on the
Mhm.
work. There was a lot of emphasis on how to motivate
Yeah.
teams, and often it was centered in the direction of performance, right? Making sure that you were supporting the a high performance, a high functioning team. There wasn't emphasis on the
Right.
individual, like who the individual was. Like I think there was maybe one or two sessions on the importance of relationships,
Mm.
but overall, there was a lot of emphasis on getting the work done. And what I'm realizing and reflecting is, as I hear what you just shared, is that when that leadership is supported by the structures and the policies, then that leadership thrives, and that leadership eventually gets further along the ladder, if you're going to call it a ladder. So I guess my question is, what is the opposite? What is the different, distinct leadership that as women of color we might say, that's where I want to
Mm.
be. That's how I want to lead.
Yeah. So the term, I enjoy using is like healing centered leadership. And the reason why I call it that is because, like I said, in the early parts of when I started a business, I had to unlearn certain things. And really another way of thinking about
Yeah.
that unlearning is healing from some of the ways
Yeah.
that I had to engage in leadership. And I started my work journey started very early. I started working when I was in high school. So I was a child, really. So that's a lot of history, right? To think about a lot of different styles.
I hear you. Me too. If
Yes.
it gives you any comfort, I hear
Good.
you.
I
Yeah,
appreciate that. Listen, it's quite the journey, right? A lot of
it
different
is.
approaches to like leadership that are present. And so there's a lot of healing from that needs to happen. A lot of that is just because I've seen it and I experienced it doesn't mean that's the only way. Does not mean that that is the right way. And doesn't mean that I have to then pass it on to someone else, right? I can do something different. And even by way of doing something different, I then also support in my own healing, right? And there are
Yes.
about six different kind of key components I associate with it. Okay.
Oh,
Ooh,
okay. I'm ready. I'm like, I was gonna say, anyone who's listening, please get like your notepad.
that's
Get like
right.
I'm ready.
We love a good
As soon
note
as
taker.
we the note taking number.
Okay, so the first one I would think of is like being asset based, right? And oh, I told you this too. A lot of the things that I do as a leader and just in my workplace practice is I use ancestral practices, a lot of ancestral knowledge. It's really rooted in that. And so our ancestors really practice this way of doing community in a way that every individual person within a community is supposed to be uplifted for their magic, what they're really great at, right?
Yes.
And so we're supposed to uplift that so they can contribute it to the community, and the community then uplifts them so they can uplift their magic, and the person can then give that magic to the community. So it's very asset based, right? So really exploring what is their magic, but not only that, but like what excites them, because there's a difference between what
Yes.
someone could be really good at and what they get thrilled to do, what they're curious
Yes.
about, and really uncovering that and making room for persons to really embed that into the workplace or the project or just a thing that folks are focused on. So that is really key. The second one would be to be really vulnerable. I can't do it all.
Hmm.
I, I
Oh
can't,
no.
right. I can't do it all. I cannot do it all. So I need a strong team, right? And that is really how I approach, our work now. Is that I know brilliant people who do brilliant work at what they do, and so I seek
Yeah.
them out and build really meaningful relationships with them, so that we can then create transformation within organizations, right?
Yeah.
And that requires me
Absolutely.
to be vulnerable and recognize that I don't know it all. I'm gonna have questions. I'm gonna
Yeah.
make mistakes, right? I have to even build a foundation of like of comfort for folks to even give me feedback, so that way they can trust me and know that I will receive it well. So like soliciting that feedback, right? The third I
Yeah.
would say is really being deeply rooted in community building and recognizing
Hmm.
that relationships are key. You touched on that
Yes.
earlier. They are key. People are moved and inspired by relationships. People are healed through relationships, right? People feel safe and nurtured through powerful relationships. So really making intentional time for that, right? I always say to organizations, and I do this with my own team members, that there has to be time carved out for relationship
Yeah.
building. Really intentional. And it has to be intentional, not just a check-in with a how are you doing
I know.
today, right?
Totally. First 5 minutes of
Right.
the
You know what
meeting
I
is
mean
like,
too, right?
yeah, I know what
It's
you
on the
mean.
agenda and you say, right,
It's on the
not a minute more, right? But you really get to know people and their stories, right? And you recognize, that someone's child is graduating. And so you ask them about that, how they
Yeah.
felt about that, what it meant. And you might connect, to your own story, but really, focus on that. I always think it's important to recognize that an organization, and we may do the thing where we say, well, this is just work and that's what it is, but it is a community, and communities need to be
It
nurtured,
is.
and there needs to
Yeah.
be intentional building, community building, and engagement to allow that community to thrive. The fourth I would say is to be really, really reflective. I'm constantly thinking
Hmm.
about the things that I need to still grow in, develop in, the ways in which I might have gaps in the things that I see. I'm very conscious of my own narrative and how my narrative can be an
Hmm.
asset, but it can also be a barrier
Yeah.
into seeing other people's
Yeah.
ways of viewing the world and then viewing the work itself. Fifth, I will say, is to be conflict brave. And I'm big on
Yes.
conflict.
I'm so yeah.
So essentially, conflict brave is my term for a way of embracing conflict. So it creates the possibility for social change, for change at large, right?
Yeah.
And so this is something that we bring to a lot of organizations, but it's something I practice in my life and my work, being conflict brave. And that involves essentially like never allowing things to fester, but naming them in the moment and
Yeah.
doing it with care, right? Um,
Yeah.
and a part of that is also doing other things like embracing change and being willing to
Yeah.
change, right? And the last one I would say
Yeah.
is trust, allowing space for trust,
Mm.
being rooted in trust,
Mhm.
and not just trust for those
Yeah.
who I am leading, but trust in myself, right? I have to remember there's a reason why I brought this person into this space. There's a reason why
Mhm.
I saw their magic or their light or their gift, right? And so I have
Yeah.
to trust myself and trust them in our relationship.
Yeah.
So those are my six things.
I love them. I
Right.
love them. Like and what I love about them is it's a
Yeah.
framework. You've created a framework of leading from a very grounded, healing centered approach,
Hmm.
and it allows for that that growth to happen in a cycle. And knowing the theme of season 2 and our conversations is about cycles.
Yeah.
It's cycles don't have to be bad,
Mm. I like that.
right? They can nurture this beautiful being and this growth in a sort of circular manner
Hmm.
that just only leads to
Yeah.
depth. The challenge with some cycles is, particularly with some of the what we shared earlier in terms of those oppressive ways of leading and being, is it can create cycles of toxicity. It can create cycles of
Mm.
micromanagement and doubt and anxiety. And so when you break that cycle and redefine it with a new one, like the one that you've
Yes.
provided, the healing centered one, the anyone who follows this is going to grow in a healthy way, both as a leader, as a person, and to recognize the beautiful constraints of our humanity,
Mhm.
which I think as women of color, we need to be reminded sometimes that we're human.
Absolutely.
We're human just as much as Michael gets to be human, just as much as Janet gets to be human. Like, we are human too. Hey, my sister. Now, I wouldn't be a good host if I didn't ask you to do this. Like, subscribe, or share this podcast with people you care about. I truly appreciate your support. I am curious. How do you practice
Woo, my
this?
own humanity.
How?
Ooh.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think there's a certain type of like tenderness and care I practice for myself.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
it's something I've
Yeah.
had to learn, not just because of the way the world wants to perceive me, but like I mean, listen, I told you earlier that I had to work as a kid, which I think implies a number of things, right? For, to have to be a child, right,
Absolutely.
and go into the workplace and contribute
Yeah.
to the household in that ways, it says a lot about
Yeah.
the kind of toughness that one has
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
essentially step up to. And
Yeah.
a form of leadership that oftentimes we don't choose to play,
No.
right?
No.
It's kind of put on top
Absolutely.
of.
And it's not a choice,
Exactly.
right? It's a requirement and a must. And so even if you're not ready, that readiness is a moot point. So I just wanted to, yeah, to highlight that.
Absolutely. So I would say I practice my own humanity through, again, a tenderness and care for myself. Listen, I think one thing that's really
Mm.
important that I feel like answers this question and the question before is like there's a form of love for self that is critical in this. And I'm saying this
Yeah.
especially because I know the audience that is listening to this, and I recognize the women that we are on this call. I'm looking at our faces, and we play a
Yeah.
particular role in this world. But we have to learn to love ourselves in a way that maybe the world hasn't necessarily
Mm.
taught us to do, and it sometimes could be counter to what the world is telling us we should do, right? Yeah, but this like love
Yeah.
and force for ourselves, so that exists. I think there's a way that I practice my own humanity by recognizing my own needs and give and kind of providing myself my needs. So for instance, a part of kind of being my own leader in a way that I needed was creating a workplace for myself that I needed. And it's interesting because most of my work happens at home. A lot of my work happens at home. And so I had to practice, even I had to think of this as a workplace and a home. And so it kind of helped in making me think about how to shape and shift things in this space, because I can't come with anxiety and tension from workplace into home space, right? So
Mm.
I let home space really inspire the workplace. And so if there's movement that's needed, then let's get up and dance, right? Let's move. Let's move the body. Yeah, let's stress for real. If we need
Yeah.
to eat, we need to walk, we need to listen to music. If we need art, that is, we shall do that. And so I think my own humanity, practicing that really comes from like that tenderness, that care, the love of self, but also
Mm.
giving myself my needs, really listening to myself.
Yeah.
And listen, what I practice for me is what I can practice for others.
Yeah.
I always tell folks,
Absolutely.
those who work with me, and also those who are also the workplaces that we go into to help the organizations, I always offer to them that I'm able to give you tenderness because I give me tenderness, right? And so I hope that inspires others, right? Because you will be able to give others in your workplace
Yes.
tenderness if you give it to yourself. Mhm.
Absolutely. Oh, Altagracia, like my heart is like filling up because you are you've really highlighted how you know so much of what the message and the narratives that we hear has always been about pouring into others,
Mhm.
right? Giving of ourselves, and to to shift that narrative towards ourselves in itself is hard
Mhm.
because it's a journey and it's different to be able to pour into oneself. And I'm so glad that you're raising the bar of what that could look like when we truly love ourselves and
Yeah.
we provide that same level of care and compassion towards ourselves.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
another some like very concrete practices in addition to like providing the
Yeah.
needs that I do is one I
Yeah.
always offer. I journal every day. Every day. I journal every day. Every day.
Oh,
And that is another thing I think
great.
that's really critical and has really helped a lot of like, because it allows me to give me time, right? I'm having an inner dialogue, a dialogue with
Yes.
self. And in many ways, it kind of is like, treating myself as a sacred person too, right? Like
Yeah.
there's that. I think it's also critical for us, especially those of us who, by force are put into certain roles that we didn't necessarily want, or also have to deal with oppression in a very different way than others do, right? Um,
Yeah.
it's important for us to really return to who we were as a child. That is something that I brought to many people, and I have
Mm-hmm.
I have practiced myself, and it has been very transformative. But really think about who you were before you had to enter these oppressive spaces, and it's not just workplaces; they're schools too. And so, who
Yeah.
are you as a child? How can you nurture that version of yourself? How can you, make room for the things that the childhood version of yourself would have loved? And there's this kind of cycle, this kind of going back in time,
Yeah.
allows room for, that I think is very, very healing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you, and I know something that we recently discovered about ourselves is we we discovered we were doing something at the same
Yes.
time, and kind of chuckled a bit about that as well. Was we discovered we were both reading a book
Yes.
and following it, and that book was The Artist's
Mm.
Way. And I was thinking, as you were just sharing just now, was how much of that book has allowed me
Mm.
to step back and think about some of the stuff that I loved doing when I was a
Yeah.
kid, and how much of the exercises and the activities are
Yeah.
helping me, rethink what do I want to put my energy towards, and where do I want to take not only my leadership but just my career in a different direction. And I would love to hear from you, like how are you doing with the Artist Way,
Ooh.
and yeah.
Thank you so much for naming this text. And I want to say thank you too, because you're really
Yeah.
sharing a gift with the community that is listening, right? Not just this conversation, but even naming that as a resource. I think The
Yeah.
Artist's Way is a very interesting text because a lot of it is focused on creativity and the creative self. I recognize
Mhm.
that in many ways as the author is teaching a spiritual practice. It's really what it is. And a lot of what the
Yes.
author is doing, it reminds me so much of the things I have learned on my journey in kind of returning to our ancestors' ways of doing things, right? So for me, I think it's really offered this kind of excitement, right? I love a good activity. I love a good prompt. As you can tell, I love a good question, right? So this text really offers beautiful questions for reflection, right? And I also feel like the author does a great job of like
Mhm.
reading us, the readers, and being like,
Yeah.
you need to get
Yes.
it together,
Totally.
right? You need to love yourself a little more, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I thought I was, so
Totally.
maybe I could use a little more tips, right? So for me, I think
No.
some of the ways in which I really, really appreciated it is the reflective questions. It's definitely inspired me to think about some of the things I'm going to get into next in my chapter.
Ooh.
Maybe writing a text myself.
Oh yes.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh,
Oh
that's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah, yeah. And really thinking about also it helped me kind of reshape and even rethink about some of the ways that I approach retreats as well, and bringing
Yeah.
folks together and kind of
Yeah.
exploring even some of the things that she herself even has named in the text.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I love how both transferable and also it sounds like personable you're taking the Artist Way,
Yeah.
and just culminating it with many other resources and sources that I know you've
Hmm.
spoken about.
So how is it?
I'd
Oh, I
love,
was gonna say,
yeah, yeah, no,
I
no,
want to
go
hear
ahead.
about
How's
your
it for
journey
me?
too. Like I love to throw a question back.
Oh, absolutely. I'll say, for those who may not know, the Artist Way is 12
Yeah.
weeks. And so I did get up to week number
Mhm.
4, and then life just was lifing at that
Mhm.
time, and right. And so I have had to pause on week 4, and my goal is to go back and finish it. So I haven't sadly made as much progress as I want to.
Mhm.
However, what I do want to speak to is I believe it's around either week 2 or week 3. You have to write down 25 things that you've always wanted to
Yeah.
do, and there's different like categories that you have to put them in, and then you have to put a date
Mm.
and you have to get
Mhm.
them done. And just as of last week, I finished all of the 25
Ooh. Oh
things.
my
Yeah, I
goodness.
know.
Wait, are you willing to share like a thing or two that was on your list? Okay,
Totally,
okay, I'm
totally.
excited.
So I mean, these are things that I had always been wanting to do, but I just didn't have a chance to. So one of them was to do a 5K run in a forest.
Oh,
And
amazing.
yes, and so I finally picked the forest that I wanted to do, and then I did a 5K run, and it was just being out in nature
Mm.
for me is what fills up my soul. And so that was one thing, which again, you would think for anybody, that's shouldn't that be easy to do? And yet in my world, it's a bit challenging.
Mm.
Um, and then the other one was I've always wanted to do this particular hike. You hike, it's not that far, but it's a fairly sort of beautiful incline. And then at the end of the hike is on top of a mountain, and it overlooks this particular cove and this inlet area. And so I did that with two girlfriends, and we went up, and it was a beautiful sunny Sunday morning. And we just sat there and we had our breakfast, took it out, had our coffee, sat down, like
Beautiful.
enjoyed just that peaceful moment. And so, so for me, it was a lot about getting back into surroundings and places that connect me to
Mm.
what I feel is Mother Earth.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you
Congratulations.
for
Yeah,
asking.
congratulations.
Thank
This is a
you.
big, I mean, these are big deals, right? Even to write a list and set an
They are.
intention. You're like, I want this for me, and to go out and do it. It's a beautiful thing, and it is worthy of celebration. And in many ways, I feel like it connects to what we're talking about, because I really do believe, we're talking about these kind of oppressive spaces that we have to function in, and
Yes.
workplaces and et cetera, or these forms of leadership. And in many ways, those things can plant these like seeds of doubt in us. They plant,
Yes.
yeah, like, and so the kind of the version of yourself that, it can be difficult for you to go get the thing that you want, because you have that planted seed of doubt within you, right?
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
part of the journey of, is I think a part of this can really help with leadership too, because you're starting to say, I know who I am. I know I can create. I know I can do. I
Yeah.
know I can set an intention and become it. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Oh
Mhm.
yeah. It is. And thank you for naming that, because I think there's also so much power in knowing that you have permission to do the very thing that lifts you up,
Right.
right? And so I'm so thankful that you've brought that into the space, because sometimes we are waiting for that permission
Hmm.
or that opening.
Ooh. I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned the word power again, because you just reminded me of additional thought I wanted to share with you.
Tell me.
Yes. In thinking about what kind of leader I wanted to be, I've thought a lot about power and the difference between kind of innate power, the power we are born with, the
Mhm.
power we just have, that is maybe aligned with who we are to our core, and institutional power. And I've always
Oh yeah.
told folks that true power is innate. Institutional power, a lot of times, is very pretend power, right? It is to have
Hmm.
power because a rule book said so, or because, you know, um, I sign a check over you, or something of that sort, right? But there is a
Yeah.
difference, and I really do believe that true power is we're born within. We have to really lean into it and find it within ourselves, and I think it's very important, especially for the women of color, particularly the Black women who are listening this to remember that.
Yeah. I'm glad that you highlighted that, because I feel like we could have a whole episode on like not only holding that power but also nurturing it
Mhm.
in a healing centered approach, because power historically has had this like almost this negative and dirty
Yeah,
connotation to
yeah.
it. And yet when I think of what you had shared earlier in terms of and ancestral wisdom, there's power in ancestral
Oh
wisdom,
yes,
and there is no negative connotation.
right,
If anything, ancestral wisdom has been rooted in power that was healing, that was cleansing,
right.
that uplifted everyone, that spoke to rituals and traditions that everybody had equal access to.
Mhm.
And oh my gosh, and I'm like thinking of all the sparks are like flying in my mind of how we can
Yes.
continue this
I
conversation.
like how you said, power has this, you said dirty word. I like that you said this dirty connotation to it. You know what else has a dirty connotation to it? I'm noticing too, work. Just the word work.
Tell me,
Work.
right? Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Oftentimes we use the word work, we think about it in the like traditional like workplace oppressive context, right? But I've been lately really
yeah,
reminding people that work can be beautiful, and we need to remind ourselves of that.
yeah.
Love is work, friendship is work, right? Caring for self is work. All of the rest is work, right? And art is work. All
Yes,
of these things are beautiful versions of work. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of that. So that way, the only way that we think about it isn't just in these spaces that could
yeah,
be potentially harmful.
exactly,
Mhm.
absolutely. Oh, Altagracia, I am so appreciative of our time. I don't know how also time just like flies by, and so I'm gonna sort of segue
Yeah.
ourselves into a bit of a wrap up. Before I do ask you a couple of just final questions, I would love to hear from you. You know, you spoke about intuition and spirituality and ancestral wisdom, which are all big, incredible topics. And so I'll ask if there is a way and there was advice that you could give to our range of listeners, and these are racialized women who are either starting their leadership journey or are well into their leadership journey, what advice would you give as a reminder of their strength in those areas?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to like ancestral wisdom, and I think of intuition as a message from the ancestors. I really do. And I feel safe enough to say this here. I really do. I'm not sure that I would say it
Yeah,
always everywhere. But I really do think of it that way. And the ways in which am able to nurture that part of me, or I'm able to listen to the intuition or hear the message from the ancestors, is with quiet time with myself, silence,
mm,
with my own self, so I can hear my own thoughts, alone time, right? Spaces away from work and roles that I have to play, walks, with myself, and a lot of, like, I told you I journal daily. And a lot of my journaling practices come from ways in which I can kind of speak to myself and uplift myself. So, like love letters to self, literally ones that I will mail out, or highlighting the things that I absolutely love about myself. I also have been really developed really close friends with elder women, elder Black women, who have really taken on very important roles in my community. And there's something very special
mhm.
about hearing the advice of elders, elder women in particular, the ways that they uplift me. I always tell myself, like, if they're saying it, you got to believe them, right? Like, listen,
Totally.
yeah, they're highlighting you. They're telling you the ways in which you are wonderful. So listen to them. And in ways, it's interesting because I even take those messages as also messages from ancestral places too, right? Coming through the elders in my life. So quiet time with elders, and really having dialogue with myself, uplifting myself, highlighting myself, and leaning into that as much as possible. And I really do believe that we're supposed to truly love ourselves. And when we think about that, I think no one ever really talks about what it takes to do that and what that really looks like in practice. We think about it for others, but we need to do that for
Yeah,
ourselves. Absolutely.
yeah. I love that. And in many ways, like that advice that you've given is a
Yeah.
journey of coming to oneself and a return to
Right.
home. And so my hope is that many will take you up on that offer, including myself and yourself, because we do deserve to not only love ourselves, but to certainly put ourselves in places
Hmm.
where that love returns. I have appreciated so much our time. And I also know that this topic brings up a lot of emotions for some. It might even bring up some memories and reflections that they too will need to reflect on. So I love to end on a light note. And I'm asking two final questions of all guests. And the first one is, if you could choose any dish or any food that you could eat every day for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
Is it? Am I answering?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you said for the guests. I'm sorry. Ooh, what would it be? Oh goodness. It's gonna be something pasta related. It's probably gonna be. I don't know what it is about pasta and cheese that.
Oh, I hear you.
Listen, I just can't. I just can't get enough of. So it's probably gonna be like a lasagna or something.
Ooh. Now my tummy's so hungry. Now I'm like, ooh, maybe that's what I'll have for
That's
dinner.
right.
I love it. I love it. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Altagracia. And often guests will share a call to
Yes.
action. And I know that there are incredible listeners and viewers out there who want to know more about you, want to know about your work, and would love to hear what's one thing that you would love the listeners or viewers to do.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've been doing lately is that we're offering virtual experience for folks. So normally we have in-person experiences, overnight experiences, but we want to make sure that our experiences are accessible to all, no matter where they are. So we're bringing back these really successful experiences, super popular experiences that we've had recently, and we're bringing it back to folks. So There are two in particular. One is on conflict bravery, how to embrace conflict to create change, which is critical to leadership, right? And the second is on facilitation, how to design experiences for groups of people to then create change as well. They're really key for folks who are interested in building intentional communities, for really owning their craft and leadership, and really thinking about how to shape their leadership in ways that are very intentional.
Amazing. So much of what you always bring out of Gracia is connection and growth. That's what I always find in your presence. And so I appreciate you sharing this with those who are listening, as well as um, the work that you're doing, because facilitation, conflict, and many other things that you're involved in, these are so much needed. And they're also skills that don't come naturally. So I'm glad that you are sharing your natural born gifts with the world. Thank you for being on Unspeakable Leadership. Thank you so much for our time
Thank
together.
you.
Leaders today face complexities that come layered with urgencies, critical nuances, and a necessity for new approaches that traditional leadership models are missing. Many of us in leadership roles see this in the brokenness of systems, the appearance of a void of compassion in messages that have been drafted with a reputational risk as a watermark, or the clarity and transparency that can haunt decision makers in knowing that some things are out of their control. Leading with hierarchy as a dominant lens is characterized by control, fear, and often silences voices, stifles creativity, and prioritizes power over people. Altagracia shared a beautiful framework for healing centered leadership. It really got me thinking, what does this journey of healing look like? And what would be required for us to lead this work as women of color, especially when the value of lived experience, intuition, and ancestral wisdom is still on an early path of being recognized as important, like that of emotional intelligence and empathy? Can we truly lead from the heart as much as the head? And will it be valued in the same way? These are some of the questions that I was left thinking about after my conversation with Altagracia. I believe we can. And as women of color, I believe we're best positioned to do so. Let me tell you why. First, within each of us is a generational blueprint. I want you to think of the deja vu moments that you've had, or the instinct to do something at a pivotal time without knowing how you knew this or where you got this from. As we cultivate a deeper connection within, that blueprint is the internal memory of ancestral wisdom that will surface. And the more that we practice listening within, the more natural that wisdom will feel and more powerful in us acting on it. Second, I think of how many people often say to me and say to countless of women of color leaders that they feel safe around us. There's a reason why they feel that way. It's because you radiate it. This superpower of creating safety can't be done easily or quickly by just anyone. So when you hold that space, open up that conversation, or say the thing that everyone wishes they could say, you are embodying the change that others can create within themselves. Lastly, your balance and harmony are equally important as the one you strive to create in your communities, families, homes, teams, and organizations. Leading healing while healing yourself is perhaps the very journey our ancestors would want for us. And it's my hope that we will do so with as much love and compassion towards ourselves first. Remember, breaking any cycle ignites self discovery, vulnerability, and courage. We don't have to do this alone, and certainly not in any competition with anyone, let alone each other. Let's embrace and shape a new paradigm of leading. There is an African proverb that says, if you think you are too small to make a difference, you haven't spent a night with a mosquito. Always remember, the world needs more of you being just you. As always, take care of yourself and see you soon.